Well, talofa love everybody, and great to see you all here. Thank you so much. A few quick thank yous. Thank you to Senior Pastor Robin, Associate Pastors Lisa and Peter for opening up their whare and allowing us to be here tonight. Thank you for coming out too, all of you, because I need to explain something very, very quickly. We are not a political party. A lot of people in Auckland, when they hear that we're getting involved in Family First, they go, oh, we're leaving our party, joining yours. We are not a political party, all right? What we are is a lobby group. We're a watchdogs, really. And what happens is people get alerted to things that might damage family. They get on to Bob, and Bob says, right, this is something we're going to investigate. And then when we investigate, we find that there's some truth in it. We'll pursue it vigorously. If it's nothing, we'll let it go. But if we're concerned about anything, we call a hui. And we called a hui tonight because we're concerned about a couple of things. And those things pertain to the referendum, and we're going to talk to you about them. And let me just explain very quickly how this works. There's 3 parts to it, right? First part is 29 minutes, we're going to go hard with euthanasia. And then there's 29 minutes where we're going to go hard with legalizing cannabis. And then there's between 29 seconds and 29 minutes for question time, depending on how many questions come from the floor, all right? So that's how it goes. And just a little warning if you came here because you wanted to cause trouble. When it comes to Q&A, you are not the third speaker, all right? You are just to ask a question, I will facilitate, and Bob will answer. Okay, and if anyone plays up, I brought someone all the way from Auckland in that green top. All right, he will take you outside and pray for you. Awesome. Okay, so very, very quickly, I just want to pull out a couple of things. There's 2 clipboards at the back there as you're passing, nothing to do with COVID, all right? But what it is to do with is if you like what you hear tonight, if you want to be part of the mailing list, if you want some emails from us, please just put your name on that with an email. And please, the ladies in the office on Monday said, Nick, please say print clearly. I did it, okay, because I always do what women say. That's true. That's true. So those are the forms, 2 clipboards at the back. And there's this one form here. Does everybody have one of these in your hands right now? Okay, if you don't, I'd advise you to, if we could have somebody bring some out, because we're going to give you the Reader's Digest version tonight, and you may want to follow the links inside the back here that gives you the 20 reasons why, because we're going to be going really, really quick. Are you strapped in? Are you ready to go? Yeah. All right, so let me just explain to you who I am. Nick Tuitasi is my name. I'm the Pacific Director of Family First. They never had a Pacific arm until about February last year, where Bob asked me to come out from the grandstands, where I'd been on the board for about 3 or 4 years, and he said, get on the field and make some tackles. So that's why I'm here tonight. I need to explain to you too, with this beautiful written document, it doesn't mean a lot to us Samoans back in the day. Let me explain to you why. Because before the white man arrived in the islands, we didn't write anything down, basically. What it was orator to orator, generation to generation, and if there was anything serious, we'd write a song and dance about it. Literally, right? So the thing about it with all this testing that's going on with DNA, you may not understand this, but some of you may be Samoan and not know it. So I've got a test for you tonight. I've got a test. It won't take long, but if you get this, then you might need to do a little bit more research into where you think you came from, all right? So this is the orator to this generation. Here's the story. There was this one particular man who was stranded on a deserted island. It was just him all on his own, very small, sitting under a palm tree. Day by day, he would look out to the ocean, and he would see nothing. It was just water. One particular day, as he's sitting under this palm tree, he rubs his eyes because he sees this beautiful French scuba diver lady just walks out of the sea in the middle of nowhere. So he sort of gets up and walks over to her, and she starts to take off her mask and a snorkel and tank, and she looks at him and she goes, how long has it been since you had a cigarette? And he goes, oh, years. So she starts to unzip her top, reaches in, grabs a packet of cigarettes, lighter, lights it up and gives it to him. He has a quick puff, and she says, how long has it been since you had a drink? And he goes, years. And so she starts to unzip her top a little bit further, pulls out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pours it out, gives it to the guy, he gives a zip. And then she says, and how long has it been since you played around? And she starts to unzip her top all the way down, and he goes, God blimey, don't tell me you got some golf clubs in there. Now the reason I share that with you is because I took your mind a particular direction with my mere words. And you know what? The referendum topics that we're going to tackle tonight, the government did exactly the same thing to you. And so we're going to peel that back and we're going to explain to you the truth of the matter. All right? So having said that, let's kick off. We're into our first subject. This is Vicky's story.
I was driving toward an intersection in early 2011 and I suddenly couldn't remember how to stop my car. Something in my head just told me to put my foot on the brake with my left foot instead of my right foot. By that time, the lights had already changed to red. And then I just sat in the car trying to figure out what had actually happened. I spent a couple of days in hospital and they were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. The doctor ordered an MRI. Almost within minutes, like getting back to the room after having the MRI, the doctor turned up and held my hand and told me that there was a mass on my brain and said he was very sorry. I remember being wheeled down the corridor and although I didn't see a ward number as they wheeled me into the room, I just thought to myself, well, you've got cancer. You wouldn't be in this ward if you didn't. And I wonder what that was going to mean for Dave and my kids.
It's like having 50 thoughts at once and trying to work out which is the good thought. And the good thought, she's still alive. The other 49 is she's going to die tomorrow.
The doctor said, you've got glioblastoma multiforme, GBM. I got my laptop out and Googled it, and it came up on the screen, the Terminator, and I was like, whoa. So then I started reading what that meant and realised that this was not good at all. You know, if I was really, really lucky, I'd see 18 months. And then I started going through my head about what I could fill those 18 months with, but very fast. Everything's happening very fast and also very slow, like you're watching a movie with someone else in it, but it's you. I was diagnosed with the same cancer that Lucretia Seals had and died from. It was around that time I came across the story of Brittany Maynard, who was a woman that moved to Oregon in order to be able to take her own life. And she sort of became the poster girl for euthanasia. It put a lot of thoughts into my head about, like, should we be promoting this? And the way that it was, it made me feel very vulnerable. And even at that early stage, which was a couple of years after I was diagnosed, that maybe I was being gutless because I didn't want to take my life. It really upset me. Dave would come home from work and find me a blithering mess because all it did was put pressure on me constantly to feel that I was being selfish by not taking my life.
When I've come back to help Mum, there's definitely a lot of changes. She's pretty much confined to the house so that, you know, she can't hang out washing, she couldn't shower. Just the littlest things that, you know, you take for granted, she just couldn't do anymore.
I was utterly exhausted, and although I didn't recognise it at the time, I now know that I was depressed. I decided that if this was how it's going to be, I didn't want to be here anymore. I counted out the pills. I was trying to figure out how many it would take to end my life. It's just something made me decide to have a cup of tea. And in those moments of having that cup of tea, I thought, no, not today, not today. So when I woke up the next day, I remember thinking to myself, what if I'd done it? I know what it's like to be so mentally and physically exhausted that it takes effort to even pick up your head. I know exactly what that feels like. I'm not cured. I'm still terminally ill. But the fact is, I was given 12 to 14 months and I have survived. It's almost 8 years now. So if I'd bought into that whole dying thing right from the beginning, which I think to some degree you do, I probably would have missed a lot of experiences that I've really enjoyed and had a lot of fun along the way. And I think all those things I would have missed. I've got 3 more grandchildren since then. Yeah, if I'd had a legal option, I doubt I would have been here because I would have made that commitment. I have good days and bad days. If I was to visit a doctor on one of those bad days and he was to offer me euthanasia as an option, I think that would just be awful. It'd be like offering nooses to people at a suicide clinic. It doesn't make any sense to me that we would even contemplate offering this as a medical choice, because it's not a medical choice.
I've come through my own battles with addiction, and Mum, in her worst, tough moments and vulnerable moments of her life, has stood by my side. I couldn't have asked for a better mum.
I get to talk to people all around the world about GBM, and this year I intend returning to work in some part-time capacity. Every day is a good day, and even when those days are really dark, they're still good days to be alive. I truly believe that this is a public issue, not a private one. We might think individually we have the right to make these choices, whereas I think we're not actually realising the impact that these individual choices might have on other people that are more vulnerable than, say, myself, that aren't in a position to fight or say no or even change their mind when it comes to the end. Someone even told me once that they felt that they were an inconvenient responsibility for their children and that their children were just waiting for them to die. We can't promote suicide awareness and think euthanasia is okay. Neither are okay.
So good evening everybody, I'm Bob, and thank you for coming out tonight. We were glad that we were able to amend our timetable and fit in coming to the Kapiti Coast, so it's nice to be here. We're telling these stories because of one thing I've learned in social debates is often it's not the best argument that wins, sometimes it's the best story, and there is power in seeing real life experience. So tonight's going to be really interesting because normally I stand up here and do the clicker as the weather person and I can tell you what the weather is coming up. But just because of the distance, Nick's going to do it. And if you've ever had to train a Samoan to do something, you'll know that it's going to be very interesting that we get this correct. So, but I think he'll do a good job. So in this debate, in the next 10 minutes, I'm assuming that most of you are here because you're leaning towards a no vote. And so tonight what I want to do is I want to add some backbone to your no vote, but also want to give you the keys to persuade people on the other side as to why you're voting and how to get them. And so the first thing we really need to look at is the definition of euthanasia. And most people do not know what they're actually voting for, what they actually want. They've actually asked people in surveys, and look, I'm sorry if I'm standing in your way, you might actually want to shift. Oh, I'll walk around. They've actually asked people what they think is the definition of euthanasia. And as you'll see up there, 85% thought it was turning off life support. That's not euthanasia. 79% thought that it was do not resuscitate orders. That is not euthanasia. 67% thought it was stopping the treatment of food. Sometimes in the late stages of your life, you can't take on solids, so you go to liquids. Once again, that is not euthanasia. People thought it was increasing the morphine, increasing the pain management, which may have the unintended effect of your life ending sooner because of that. That is not euthanasia. So this is one of the things, when Nick tells that joke, and especially in churches, I sort of cringe because I know where people's minds are going. But this is the exact thing that the government has done in terms of these debates. In this referendum, they have not said to you in the polling booth, do you support or oppose euthanasia? No. They've manipulated the language and you are being asked, do you support end-of-life choice? We all support end-of-life choice, don't we? And you know what? It's already legal. You have end-of-life choice. What they're saying is, they want end-of-life choice to be helping people to commit suicide and to kill them because they think they have no value. So what's the problems with euthanasia? 6 key points. Firstly, abuse will happen even with safeguards. They talk about safeguards, but this is what the doctors say. The doctors themselves say that there's no guarantee that they can identify coercion that's going on, that someone feels the obligation, whether it's internal or whether it's people outside. The legislation says that doctors just have to do their best. Do their best. I mean, that's pretty vague, isn't it? And if you've got someone like Dr. Philip Nixty, who travels around Australia and New Zealand and the world, showing people how to commit suicide and giving them the means to commit suicide, I mean, what's their definition of do their best? And in fact, in Belgium, in the Flemish region, the surveys have shown that a third of people who have requested suicide actually receive it without consent. It's done without their consent. The second point is this. Just go back one, Nick. The diagnosis and the prognosis can be wrong. Now, I'm sure you're aware of people who have been given, maybe it was you. The doctor told you you had something wrong with you, and actually it was something else. And you may know people who are told they were given so much time to live and they have outlived it. Vicky is still alive. That was recorded last year. So she's 9 years on and she was given 12 to 14 months. She's hoping to make it to the referendum to vote no. And the surveys show that actually doctors get it wrong. They're not perfect. They themselves admit that it's a very inexact science. And yet apparently you qualify if you're likely to die within 6 months. That's very vague as well. Third one, the right to die becomes a duty to die. In other words, you feel like you've had a good innings, you feel like a burden on your family, you've been told how much your treatment is costing or you can't afford it. And the interesting thing is that we have the right to die, but we don't have the right to good palliative care. Do you know that hospices are only 40% funded by the state? They have to raise 60% of their budget. And, I think that we should be fully funding hospices because that is our most vulnerable people and they deserve the very best care and the very best palliative care, don't they? But here's the interesting thing. You have probably been told that people want euthanasia because they're dying in extremely excruciating pain. Hospices and palliative care doctors will tell you that palliative care has advanced so much that they can prevent that. Okay, they can manage that. What is the reason that people are asking for euthanasia? In Oregon, 49%, virtually half of people said it was simply because they were a burden on their family. They just felt it was too much to ask their family to care for them, which is a pretty horrible thought to have, isn't it? In Washington, burden, loss of dignity, loss of autonomy. In other words, they were more scared of actually just losing control and having to depend on people. And in Canada, the latest stats have just come out, and similar, burden, loss of dignity. But look at that last one. 14% said that they wanted euthanasia because they felt lonely and isolated. The next point is, look, I don't think I really need to go through this point, do I? I can't go up to this group of people and say, we're going to spend money to promote suicide prevention. We're going to have World Suicide Prevention Day last week, and we don't want you to commit suicide, and we're going to do everything we can, right? Good. But we're going to go over to this sad-looking sack of people over here and say, your life's stuff, man, and we're going to help you commit suicide. That's what we're doing with euthanasia. We're distinguishing, and basically when you promote assisted suicide, it sends the message that suicide is acceptable, and that's exactly what these medical professionals said to the government. They said, and look, if you read the media and you read an article on suicide, what's the first line? It says, this article is about suicide, and then it has a list of counselling down the bottom. And yet, at the same time, you read another article that promotes and says how great assisted suicide is going to be. That's a conflicting message, isn't it? Assisted suicide devalues the disabled. During the first reading of David Seymour's bill, a Labour MP, Louisa Wall, got up and she talked about Lucretia Seals. And she said this, and I quote, "The respect that Lucretia was starting to lose for herself, she couldn't care for herself, she couldn't go to the toilet, people had to look after her. It was degrading for her." End quote. Now, when she said that, the disabled community were very angry because they said, you've just described our everyday. Every day people have to toilet us, feed us, wash us. Are you saying that we have no respect, that we're being degraded by who we are every day? And that's the message that it sends. And there's a Dr. John Fox, who's a vicar in Christchurch. He lives in constant pain because of a condition he has. And he says, don't drop us, don't make it harder for us, don't tempt us to end our lives. When we have our darkest moments, we need our country to reflect back to us that we are loved, necessary, valued and equal. And he says the bill scares him, and it scares disabled people because it gives the underlying message that actually you haven't got dignity and you'd be better off dead. And the last point is that medical professionals oppose it. And I always think, when you pass a law, go to the people that have to enforce it and ask them what they think. And 99.9% of doctors oppose it. The interesting thing is that during the debate, David Seymour said that the views of doctors carried the same weight as the views of plumbers. That's the respect he gave to the medical profession, which is quite disgraceful. There are some rogue doctors out there, as well as Dr. Philip Nixty. There's this guy, he's a British neurosurgeon. You'd think he'd know better. But he said, they argue that grannies will be made to commit suicide. Even if a few grannies get bullied into it, isn't that the price worth paying for all the people who could die with dignity? That's a terrible justification, isn't it? And that's part of the problem, is that some medical professionals agree with assisted suicide and euthanasia. They will sign up to be part of the doctors that are available in New Zealand to deliver it. And so therefore you wonder just how much of the safeguards they will follow, how strictly they will follow it. Now the other point that people will bring up is a slippery slope. And you will start to read articles that says there is no slippery slope, it's going to stay the way it is. And yet you look overseas, in every jurisdiction there has been slippery slope. Okay, there has been euthanasia for kids, there has been euthanasia for dementia, for botched operations, for people who are tired of life. And in fact, Marion Street said that exact thing right at the beginning of this debate. She talked about children with euthanasia, and she said it's a bridge too far, in my view, at this time. If that's not a hint that once the foot is in the door, that it's going to go wide open, then we're obviously not thinking about this whole issue. Now, the other thing, here's an example out of the Dutch news, and this is from 2 months ago in July. And an MP in the Netherlands, where it's been legal for a while, he has just put up a bill that says that when you get to the age of 75, you automatically qualify for euthanasia. So 65, you get your gold card from Winston. 75, you get your euthanasia card from David Seymour. And what was the justification for him putting up this private member's bill? It was that they found that 55,000 Dutch people have a serious death wish. So, in other words, they're struggling with suicidal thoughts, depression, mental illness. And so what's the solution? Hey, we'll help you end it all. We'll make it legal. That's pretty bad when you get society coming to that point. Now, you will also be told that this is only going to apply to the very few people are going to take advantage of euthanasia. It's only for a very small minority, right? You might have heard that argument. The problem is that in every jurisdiction that has enabled it, it has grown. Now, and I'll show you some graphs on that. Just firstly, I'll just go through these quickly. If we get a yes vote on this referendum at the election, it is binding. So if the yes vote wins, we will have one of the most extreme euthanasia laws in the world. And we seem to be very good at passing extreme laws at the moment, aren't we? And it's really important that if you're talking to people about this, that they understand that even if they support some form of euthanasia, this is way over the top. It's extreme. Let me just go through these points quickly. Firstly, this is what the law says that people are voting on, and it will come into force if we vote yes. There's no requirement for mental competence at the time of death to actually figure out if the person still wants it. There's no mandatory requirement to get a psychiatric assessment. Secondly, there's no independent witnesses. It can be just the medical doctors. And it could be 2 medical doctors who support euthanasia. So what's the check there? Unlike other jurisdictions that have a calling off period of 9, 10, 14 days, we have no calling off period. So you request it within 48 to 72 hours, you could have the lethal dose. There's no requirement for you to go to your own doctor who knows you, who knows your medical background, who knows your mental history, and also knows your family and whether they're after your money and there's elder abuse going on. And the other worst part about it, as you'll see in the brackets there, is that you can block family members from even knowing that you are applying for euthanasia and that you're going to receive it. There's no requirement to seek available treatments. If you're told you've got 6 months, but hey, there's new medical advances and we're going to try that and we think we can extend your life, like to Vicky, we can give you 9 years instead of 14 months. you can just say, no, I don't want the alternative stuff, I'll just take the euthanasia straight away. There's no clarity between terminal and chronic disabled. Now, some of you who have been following this debate will know that disabled people can't apply for euthanasia as of right. The problem is that many disabled people are what you'd say is permanently terminal. In other words, if they didn't take their medication, if we didn't support them and feed them and care for them, and if they just decided they didn't want to take their medication, they would become terminal. They would die within 6 months. And so there is that grey line, and that's what Dr. John Fox was getting at earlier. There's a concern about protection for hospices, and it went to the Wellington High Court recently, and the judge effectively said that, look, it looks like the law protects you, but we're probably going to need a test case. It's too early to say. And that's not a good law when that happens. But the other problem is that doctors don't have freedom of conscience. If a patient comes to a doctor and the doctor doesn't want anything to do with euthanasia and doesn't think their patient should be even having it, knows some of the underlying reasons, that doctor still has to refer their patient to the euthanasia panel to get euthanasia. And there's concern about the paperwork, the accountability. If there's anomalies in the paperwork, the registrar doesn't have to check, doesn't have to look at the medical background to see if the person actually qualified. And hey, in the Netherlands, a quarter of euthanasia cases don't even have paperwork. So that's a concern. Now, just back to my point about the increase, let's look at Oregon. Oregon passed the euthanasia law, and as you can see, there's just been an increase in deaths over time. Let's go to the Netherlands, big increase. Let's go to Belgium, big increase. Let's go to Canada, big increase. And the latest stats just came out of Victoria, Australia, where that successful Premier Daniel Andrews is. And when they passed the euthanasia law a year ago, he said, look, nobody's going to really want this. Maybe a dozen people are going to ask for euthanasia in the first year. 12 months later, multiply that by 10, 120 people asked for euthanasia. Because it no longer is the exception, the exceptional case, it becomes kind of the, gee, why am I not having it? Think of the money I can save. Think of my family can get on with their own life. Now, the last point is this question. We don't have the death penalty in New Zealand. Now, I don't know about you, but there was a guy that walked into a mosque in Christchurch who I think is a perfect qualification for the death penalty. But we don't have it in New Zealand, and there was two major reasons. One was sanctity of life, okay? But the other reason, which many people bought into that may not have worried about the sanctity of life issue, was this statement. We don't have the death penalty because what if we make a mistake, right? What if we get one wrong? You know what? As you push back on people who are thinking of voting yes, ask them this question. How many euthanasia mistakes are you willing to accept? Because you could be dealing with someone who got the wrong diagnosis. You could be dealing with someone who was told they had 6 months and they actually had 9 years. You could be dealing with someone who's simply depressed and actually with the right support can live out the final stages of their life with family and with that support. And you may accidentally kill someone who actually is being pressured by their family because they just want the money. And there's elder abuse going on. How many mistakes are we willing to accept? That's a key question that you ask anybody who you know is voting yes. So there's two key things I want you to push back on. Firstly, ask them that question, how many mistakes? And the second question is, what are they actually wanting? What kind of end-of-life choice do they want? Because I can guarantee most people are voting for the right to turn off life support, to stop feeding, to not go through unnecessary pain. Okay? That's what people are voting for. When you tell them that those things are already legal and that we will give them good hospice care and palliative care, people will vote no. Okay? That's first topic.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, just 2 quick points from a Pacific perspective, because that's my role, Pacific Director. I just need to explain to you very quickly. First of all, Bob is very PC. He's politically correct because he has to be, but I am not, all right? I'm PC in a different way. I'm what they call pacifically correct. All right? Pacifically correct just basically means I'm going to hit you right between the eyes with the truth, because that's how our islanders like it. All right? So, everyone has an auntie if you're Samoan, and she hasn't seen you for a long time. When she says, oh, you're fat. All right? The truth, right between the eyes. That's how our aunties do it. So I'm going to give you some facts right between the eyes and hard. Are you ready? Okay, first thing is in February, Bob asked me last year to have this a document translated. It's about euthanasia into the Samoan language. I don't have that capacity, so I flicked it onto my father-in-law. And I got a call the next day, and the father-in-law said, Nick, we've got a problem. I said, yeah, what is it? And he said, we do not have a word in the Samoan language for euthanasia. And that's because in our culture, we don't kill our old people and we don't kill our sick people. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, isn't that something fantastic that our Kiwi culture could adopt, eh? Because we've adopted so many cool Kiwi things. Maybe we should be adopting that concept, all right? The second thing that I'm really, really concerned about is, you know that, well, Mick and I are different. We're first generation born New Zealand Samoans, right? But every year, there's 1,000 that get off the boat to come to do the jobs, fruit picking and everything else. So for them, English is the second language. When my mum and dad used to go and buy us a fridge from farmers, they'd take us kids along because we would translate. So what would happen, and this is what all our Pacific Island people will do back in the day, they go in, they go and buy a fridge, whatever, and the Balangi salesman there, he starts filling out forms and telling us everything, and this is my parents. Yeah, yes, 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 yes. As soon as he gets up to go and do something, he's like, what the man say? What the man say? So here's my concern, that I drop off my mother-in-law who's critically ill. She is terminally ill, all right? And every time the grandkids go there, she keeps going back to hospital because her immune system's down and she's struggling. But I drop her off on a Friday so I can go with Bob to do a talk somewhere. And then I go back at the end of the weekend. I go into the hospital and they say to me, sorry, Nick, Mrs. Clark was euthanized over the weekend. And I say, whoa, 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 stop. How did that happen? And they say, well, she asked for it. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. How did she ask for it? Because she doesn't speak very good English. And then the next point they say is, well, we don't have to tell you anything. Right? They can hide behind the new law. Oh, we don't have to tell you anything. She didn't want you to know. How do you know? How do you know they just didn't botch something up and says, oh, put it down to euthanasia? So that's the major concern I have for Pacific people. Because one moment they're showing them the lunch menu that says Malaysian noodles, and then the next form comes, it's euthanasia. Yes, yes. And there's no one there to ask, what the man say? We've got to be really careful of that, team. That's my major concern for our Pacific people, and that's why I jump up and down. That's why I'm here tonight. We good with that? How are we going? All right? You know why we're doing so good is because you guys got that Samoan blood in you. You know that, eh? You laughed at my joke. It means you guys have got it. So we're going on to part 2 now. Here is Jake's story, cannabis.
I started really smoking marijuana when I was like 18. I'd actually gone to university to study to try and become a doctor. First year of university, I actually didn't smoke at all. I had no interest in marijuana. Second year, I met a guy in, I think it was a neurobiology class, and he was involved in NORML. And NORML's the National Organisation for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And they're obviously very pro-legalisation. So I end up doing quite a lot of promo work for them. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I was just like, weed is so awesome, I want people to smoke it. So 420 in the States is the police code for marijuana. So if they say, we've got a 420 in progress, that's a marijuana incident. So every Friday at 420, it started with 5 people when I started kind of pushing it. And we ended up 50 or 60 people on campus. I used to do quite funny things. I'd go into lecture theatres, there'd be like a whiteboard behind, like as everyone was gathering, stand behind the whiteboard, draw a weed leaf, and my claim to fame is I could do it in 7 seconds. and then do the 420 Friday. Turned it round as the lecture theatre was full, and just before the lecturer was there, and just walk out. Halfway through second year, I increased the amount I was smoking drastically. So I'd wake and bake, which is get high. And at the end, I was probably getting quite high 3 times a day, and not just like having a small joint. I'd go very high. Pushed myself to see kind of as almost like, because I was like, I'm doing psychology, I'm doing neuroscience. Let's see what my brain can do, and kind of try and maintain an objective perspective. Around exam time, I started having pretty severe effects. I'd wake up and I wasn't breathing. There might have been some other stuff going on as well, but my walk became weird. I forgot how to walk properly. I had to think left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And so I kind of stumbled around and my eyes started staring, and just had this kind of zombie gaze. Drug taking is, by its nature, it becomes a bit of a competitive sport among some people. I don't know anyone who regularly smokes weed as a stoner who hasn't taken something harder. So I got to exams and I was melting down. I had to leave university. I remember trying to prep for an exam, and I was reading just one A4 page of stuff on, it was a neuroscience exam, or psychology, can't remember which one, but again, the irony. So I went back home just before I left. Went round to a friend's place. We were smoking a huge amount. We smoked some hash as well, which is just THC essentially. And then I got home and I did some buckies, and went home, and I remember one point where I just couldn't feel my heartbeat anymore. I couldn't feel air coming in my lungs, and I was like, I'm dying. Just this massive wave of blackness came over top of me, and I fell out of my body. And yeah, as soon as I smoke, I just hear voices yelling at me, you're a effing loser, you're a piece of, look at that guy. And like, the time where I actually was like, oh my gosh, like it kind of snapped all of a sudden. I was like, there's something dreadfully wrong here. I was chasing voices around the house. So I was hearing voices, and I remember there's a thing called Test the Nation that was on TV at the time. And it was a national IQ test. And I breezed through college, I breezed through first year of university, passed without a huge amount of effort. I got A's consistently without trying too hard. And I remember going on this Test the Nation thing, and my IQ had dropped 30 points. So I started being smart, and then I ended up being pretty stupid. Ended up going on antipsychotics and antidepressants, which obviously really helped. I got to the point where I was just like, I'm improving a lot. I had my amazing friends around me, and then having an amazing family who supported me, and I had an amazing caseworker, had a psychiatrist as well. Haven't smoked weed for probably almost 13 or 14 years. There is obviously that huge irony that I was studying neuroscience and psychology, and I ended up getting drug-induced psychosis. I thought because I was studying neuroscience and psychology that I could control what was going on. Didn't understand how deeply addicted I was and how damaging this was until it was too late, until I had started hearing things and seeing things that weren't real, and until I was depressed and anxious and pushing people away from me that I shouldn't have, and dropping out of university and things like that. There is significant harm in marijuana. I know that from my own life. I know that from the lives of other people. I've seen it directly. If we legalise for recreational use, you're going to get an increase of people smoking weed, and no doubt about it. And you're also going to get an increase of mental health problems. To do something so counterproductive in the name of, because everyone else is, everyone smoked weed, we might as well make it legal. It's like, that's stupidity at its extreme, really.
So first got into this debate about 3 years ago when I saw it coming up on the horizon, and went to Colorado, went to California, and also 2 years ago went up to Canada just after they had legalised. because I wanted to see for myself what legalisation looked like. And there was two key things that I learnt. The first is that we are dealing with a much harder, more harmful drug than what was available in the early 70s. The early 70s, the THC, which is a psychoactive ingredient, had an average around 3 to 4% psychoactive ingredient, the THC. But as you can see there, it has just increased over time, getting up to 12%. So this is a thing that makes you stoned, that gets you high, part of the plant. And the latest data shows that this orange line there, that it's actually got up to about an average of 16%. So that's a lot higher than the 2 to 3 to 4% that they had at Woodstock. But then you've also got to look at this green line at the top, because that's the concentrate, and I'll come back to explain that a bit more, but that's averaging around 61% THC, and in fact you can get up to 80, 90%. So we're dealing with a much harder drug. So when people think about this debate, they're thinking about the car at the top, but in fact we're talking about a drug that is now supercharged and is like the car at the bottom. The second thing I learned is that when most people think about this debate, they think about people rolling a joint, sitting on the back porch, laughing at Nick's jokes, getting the munchies and wanting to go to sleep. But the cannabis has gone way past that. They're now extracting the THC and putting it in anything you can eat, anything you can consume, and also anything you can carry. So let's have a look at some of these examples. You've seen water bottles. Just go back one, Nick. And you can put it into the drink, you can put it into edibles, onto the water bottle, you can put it into cups of tea, so you can literally have high tea. You can put it into what are supposed to be for people who have, breathalyzers, what do you call it, for asthma. But actually people are vaping. You can have oral sprays, nasal sprays, you can even have suppositories, because you can get very high very quickly with a suppository. You can then vape on highlighter sticks. So anything that you can put the THC in can be used, and that's why kids love it, because they can have these things at school. You can put it in a data stick. In fact, I could have been vaping on this microphone for all you know. They then get very creative, and you put it in the tassels of a hoodie. So a girl can be actually vaping with the hoodie. So it's got way beyond that, but it's also got to the concentrate, and we're now extracting the THC, the psychoactive ingredient, out of the plant. And so that top right one there, the butane hash oil, you can go down to your local Bunnings or Mitre 10 that we passed just coming down the road here, get your bottle of butane, and if you know how, with the plants that you're going to be able to legally grow in your backyard, you can extract out, using the butane, the THC and create a dab, and with that dab you can get high with about 60, 70, 80% THC if you know what you're doing. Now, I know some of you young people are asking, what's a dab? No, actually, it's the older people who are probably asking that, isn't it? This is a dab. Think of crack cocaine and meth consumption. It's where you heat up the concentrate and then you breathe in the fumes. And you are getting high concentrate THC. So as you can see, we are going way past the 2 to 3% joint. And with that increased potency, it makes it a harder drug and the harm is greater. So we've gone beyond just smoking. We've got edibles, we've got vaping, and we've got dabs. And we should have learnt from the tobacco industry. It's taken us about, 100 years to finally figure out that the tobacco industry were lying. They told us they weren't going to target kids. They told us that it wasn't addictive, and they even got doctors to recommend certain brands. And so we finally figured it out, and we're going to go smoke-free 2025, except this year apparently we're going to go legalise cannabis 2020. And if you can figure out that one, then come and tell me. Now, if I was going to argue for the yes side for cannabis, the argument that I would use, that I think is the only one that carries a bit of merit, is if kids are smoking a joint, youthful indiscretions, if someone is at that low level, we don't want to throw the book at them. We definitely don't want to put them in jail. We don't want to be giving them convictions that ruin their lives. We want to give them help, okay? I think that argument has merit. But guess what? It's already happening. Because nobody is going to jail for smoking a joint. Convictions have plummeted because the police are using, and let me quote the police, They are using alternative resolutions. They're using pre-charge warnings. They're using the alcohol and drug courts and programs like Te Pairanga. They're using the health and counselling services. So in other words, they are not throwing the book. They are actually using a health approach on low-level users. But here's the key thing. The police say that they still need the law because they need to target the growers, the dealers, the people standing outside your local kids' high school. And so that coercion of the law is very important. Now, here's a classic quote from a board member of the Drug Foundation, and it was published just last week. She said, for more than 20 years, the police have basically turned a blind eye to low-level cannabis use and possession. Most people found with a small amount of cannabis are not even charged, convicted, or punished. Interesting quote, isn't it? Given that what they're trying to tell us, in that we need to legalise because we're punishing all these people, but we're not. Now, once again, here's the smoke and mirrors and why Nick tells that joke that I cringe at every time when he tells it in a church. There's a whole lot of smoke and mirrors around this question. You are not going into the polling booth to be asked, do you support legalising dope? What's the question? Do you support cannabis legalisation and control? Sounds great, doesn't it? We all want to control drugs. Let's look at what their definition of control is. Firstly, just go back one, Nick. It's hard training Samoans. Thank you. Firstly, each day, each person can purchase 14 grams of cannabis. On average, you can basically purchase and carry up to 40 joints per day, per person. Apparently that's control. And who's going to police that? And what are you going to do with the ones you don't smoke? I can probably have an idea. Secondly, you can grow up to 4 plants in your backyard if you've got 2 adults in the house. If you're into hydroponics, got a glass house, or you know what you're doing, and the soil is very fertile, you can probably produce about just over 10,000 joints per year with 4 decent-sized cannabis plants, which is an average of 30 joints per day, in your backyard with the kids watching. Apparently that's control. And the third thing is, remember we talked about Woodstock weed being about 3 or 4%? They're setting the limit as high as 15%. But here's the thing, this is what the police say. The police actually think it should be higher. And the reason they think it should be higher is that as soon as you set it at 15%, what are the druggies going to do? The druggies who want the potent stuff, they're going to go to the black market. Okay, as soon as you put restrictions on it because they want the potent stuff. Now, you've probably been told this, that we need to legalise because basically every New Zealander is smoking dope. Yeah, you heard that one? Let's just look at the facts on that. It is based on one study out of Otago University, which followed 1,000 people from the 70s. But let's have a look at some other data. The Ministry of Health and the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research say that it could be as half of that have smoked at any time over their life. You may be in that stat. You may have had a joint when you were at school. You may have, you may have just had a test period where you got into it, but you got out of it because of the health harms and because you knew it was illegal. Okay, but let's look at current users. Who's kind of the regular users? And what the Ministry of Health shows is that in the last 12 months, only 15% of New Zealanders have used cannabis. Only 15%. And only 8% have used it in the last 30 days. The kind of regular users. Now, put that in comparison, 80% of us have used alcohol because it's legal. So you can see that the illegality of cannabis is actually keeping its use relatively low. But what it also says is, if only 15% are using cannabis in the 12 months, guess what? 85% of us aren't. So everybody is not doing it. Don't buy that statement. Now, I know that if you have said to anybody that you're voting no in the cannabis referendum, what's the first response that you get? But what about medicinal? Medicinal has so much promise, guarantee it. And this is a key statement that you need to push back against because it's a smokescreen. Let me explain why. Firstly, medicinal cannabis was legalised in 2018. The Drug Foundation called it a win for patients. Okay? Now, there are problems with the medicinal cannabis regime because it's costly. There's still research to be done on it, and so there's not a great availability of products yet. And a lot of doctors don't prescribe it because a lot of doctors don't believe that it works. Okay? But there is problems with the medicinal cannabis regime. There's been some promising research which shows that it's good for nausea if you're having chemotherapy. It's good for some spasticity for certain types of child epilepsy. It's good for some elements of Parkinson. Okay? So there's some promise. But it still needs to be fixed. Okay? So we need to go back to the politicians because the politicians aren't that great at passing good laws, as we all know. And we need to tell them to fix the medicinal cannabis regime. But here's the key. That has got nothing to do with what the referendum is about, which is about legalising recreational cannabis use for the purpose of getting stoned. And you need to explain that to people, because there's a whole lot of people voting yes because they want medicinal, but in fact they don't want recreational. And if they know that medicinal is already legal, they'll vote no. And so one of our key messages that we've been telling people is medicinal is already legal, recreational is what the referendum is about. And that's part of the reason I think that we're starting to win the debate, because people are starting to see the difference. Now, let me just do a quick test here, just to find out who are the political animals here. How many people know what a private member's bill is? Okay, good. We've got a politically savvy group here. Private members group bill, for those who don't know, is not where the government introduces a law change, but where it's introduced by an individual MP. So David Seymour introduced the private members bill on euthanasia. Okay? Now, 5 weeks ago, a bill was introduced into the private members bill. It got drawn out of the cookie jar, and it was a bill that would improve the access of medicinal cannabis and improve the regime around it and better identify patients who could benefit from it. Who heard about it? We've got one down there. I get about one every night I ask this, if that. Now, let me just prove that I'm not telling the truth. Okay, Shane Retty, the only medical doctor who's a politician, he introduced the bill, it got drawn. You didn't hear about it, and I want to tell you why you didn't hear about it. Firstly, the media didn't tell you about it because the media, in my view, are strongly pro-cannabis. Secondly, the Drug Foundation, Chloe Schwarbeck, Helen Clark, they definitely didn't tell you about it. Now let me explain why the media and those groups didn't tell you about it. Because if they fixed the medicinal regime, they've just stuffed up their yes vote. Do you see the smoke screen that's going on? That's why Nick tells that joke at the start and I let him, because it shows the manipulation that is going on of the language. And you'll hear that we need to legalise cannabis for medicinal reasons. It's already been legalised, fix that regime. And this is where you need to push back on anybody who's voting yes on this cannabis issue. Ask them, do you just want medicinal? Because 9 times out of 10, they do. Okay? When I went to Colorado, anybody been to the States, you'll know that the lasting impression you get is, man, there's a McDonald's everywhere and there's a Starbucks everywhere, right? That was my impression. The interesting thing in Colorado is that there's still more pot shops in Colorado than McDonald's and Starbucks. Last week, there was a report released by the New Zealand government. They didn't want to release it. Andrew Little wanted to bury it, but he got forced to release it. And it showed this, that we will have more cannabis stores than McDonald's, KFC's and Burger King's combined. Here's a really neat experiment to do. When you go home, every time you go past a BK, KFC or McDonald's, say to yourself, there's a pot shop in my local neighbourhood. And that's, you might have seen our ad, full-page ad in the Dominion Post, which showed what a pot shop would look like in your local backyard. That's the normalisation in our neighbourhood. Now, just finally, how many people got their how many people got their pamphlet from the government? Yeah, okay, hopefully most of you used it to start the fire. But Andrew Little sent out this message in the government telling us about the referendum. And at the top, he said what the referendum questions are, and that's exactly what he should do, and then he should butt out. But he continued to go on and talked about the bill and basically said this: by voting yes, you are going to reduce cannabis-related harm. Okay? The implication there is that by voting yes, you will reduce cannabis-related harm. Well, let's just put that to the test, shall we, and let's just look overseas, and let's go through these slides very quickly. And like I say, if you've been taking photos of them, don't worry, I'll email them to you, because I'm quite happy for you to publish them and share them. Okay, and we're going to do this quick. Firstly, let's look at youth use rates in legal states compared to states where it's illegal. It's higher in legal states, because when you legalise, kids want to use it. Increased harm. Next one. This is the latest data out of Colorado, just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it found on the left there that the increase of usage amongst 15 or younger increased harm. And what they found was that kids are smoking it less, and look what they're doing more on the left-hand side. They're dabbing it. In other words, high school kids blowing their brains apart with dabs of 60, 70, 80% THC. And even worse, they then get in a car, right-hand side, and they're driving. This is surveys of high school kids. Massive increase. Then people will say Uruguay is really rocking. No, it's not. Look at the increase in youth usage, 15 to 18, 19 to 24. It's increased harm. Look at Canada. There's been an increase. And in fact, that's what the Burl report said. We would get a similar increase in overall usage, increased harm. They've surveyed kids, 12th graders, which is year 13 in New Zealand. For us oldies, that's 7th form. They said, if we legalise it, are you more likely to start using it or use it more? Guess what? 1 in 4 said absolutely. Should we be surprised? Because when you legalise something, what's it say to young people? It's okay, safe, we approve of it, go for it. Hospitalisation rates related to marijuana, increased harm. Calls to poison centres in Colorado on the left, Washington State on the right, increased harm. Emergency department visits for cannabis in San Diego, increased harm. This is in New Zealand even before we've legalised, increased harm. And look at the youth rate, 15 to 19, 20 to 24. That's where the biggest cannabis hospitalisations have happened in New Zealand already. The Christchurch study, which was a longitudinal study as well, increased harm in all of those areas. Remember the pamphlet said, by legalising we will reduce harm? Starting to get the message? It's a load of baloney. Now this is the latest study that was done last year, and it was published in The Lancet, which if anybody's into academia will know The Lancet is the Rolls-Royce of research. And it was done by Royal King's College in London. And they found that if you smoke marijuana on a daily basis, you are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis. And if you smoked high-potency marijuana daily, you're 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis. Read the next line. By high potency, they were referring to marijuana with a THC of 10%. What are we starting at? 15. And of course, then you've got the dabs that you can do through your backyard grow. Pot use is strongly correlated with psychosis. It affects the mind. The Swedish study, the Dunedin study, said that. Suicides, it affects suicides, and that's shown in Colorado. And it's also shown amongst adolescents who have committed suicide as well. There's been an increase in marijuana being in the system. One area that will decrease if we legalise cannabis is IQ, and that's why it's called dope. Marijuana use by pregnant women has increased. Why? Because pregnant women are being told by pot shops that they should smoke dope because it deals with morning sickness, despite the fact that it affects the development of the unborn child. Accidents in Washington State increased after legalisation. And and of course we're already being told that drug driving is hurting us, aren't we, already, even before legalisation. And workplace drug testing, there's been an increase. These are all increased harms, folks. Can you see what the point is? They're telling us that if you vote yes, you will reduce harm. I'm telling you that if you vote yes, there will be a massive increase in social problems, mental, physical, with our families, with our young people on the road, in the workplace. Now, one of the other arguments you will hear is that we need to legalise cannabis because Samoans like Nick and the Māori are being unfairly targeted. There's a couple of responses to that. The first is that, unfortunately, Māori are twice as likely to smoke cannabis than non-Māori. That's a problem. That's why they appear disproportionately in the stats. And we need to figure out why they're turning to drugs. What is it in their communities and their social upbringing that they're turning to drugs, right? But here's the second thing. In states that have legalised cannabis, the prosecutions and the involvement with the police for minority communities has actually increased substantially. Now, why is that? I'm not sure what it's like in the Kapiti Coast, so let me tell you what it's like in Auckland. In Auckland, the alcohol industry and the pokie machine industry are not in Ladies Mile, Mission Bay or Remuera. They're in my hometown, Manarewa, South Auckland. They're in the impoverished areas, the low-income areas, the minority groups who have the least resources to get out of addiction. Because what do these groups, alcohol, pokies and cannabis want? They want addicted customers because then you've got a customer for life. And pot shops in Colorado are concentrated in the low-income minority communities. That's why they have more involvement. That's who the industry will target. They'll target our Pacific Island and Māori kids. If you're talking about social justice, getting Māori and Pacific Islanders more exposed to cannabis is not social justice. And let me just quote Dr. Harini Carr from the Auckland University, and he says this: seeing whānau members who can't go without cannabis every day for 40 to 50 years, seeing 15-year-olds who just want to use cannabis every day, it's insidious, it's damaging, it's powerful in our communities. Legalisation is not the magical cure people often portray it as, because the underlying reasons for that treatment of Māori, that institutional bias in criminal justice remains. We need to fix those first. You know, he's exactly right with the social justice argument. If there is institutional bias and racism in justice and police, let's fix that. And you and I should lead that charge. If there's institutional bias and racism in our health system or our education system, you and I should lead the charge to fix that, right? But guess what? It's got nothing to do with legalising a harmful, addictive drug that destroys kids' brains and harms families and society. Separate out the two issues. Okay? Now, just finally, we have started a campaign called Say Nope to Dope, and you might have to press return because the Samoan's forgotten how to do it. And we sent out an email asking people, and you might have got the email saying, can you send us a one-sentence reason as to why you're voting no, because we thought, oh, it'd be good marketing. It was a really dumb idea of mine because 1,300 emails later. But anyway, the staff went through and it was, you know, they found it pretty emotional because there were some pretty powerful stories. But here's a couple. Tony from Timaru, he says, as a school guidance counsellor, I see on a daily basis the havoc that cannabis wreaks on our students compared to those who don't use it. David said, first you take the drug, then it takes you. Gary said, I've experienced the harmful impacts of drugs firsthand. As a former user, my mental health was greatly affected through suffering extreme paranoia. Graham said, had a son who used marijuana, turned out to be a gateway drug to hard stuff and a life of crime. And Rod, who's a policeman, said, I've seen the damage cannabis causes mentally to the user, devastation to whānau, and the introduction to harder drugs for the user. So we've started a campaign, Say Nope to Dope, and we've started this campaign, which I haven't got these slides in, Nick, so don't go to it, called New Zealand is Too Precious to Be Wasted. And we're showing all these scenes in live. So that's our key line leading into the election. New Zealand is too precious to be wasted. And it's a good line, eh? And so we've pulled together a whole lot of groups and also some well-known faces. So we're just going to show you a little promo video as a special treat for coming tonight. So here we go.
I have a very young family and I want to encourage you at the next referendum to say nope to dope.
Kia ora, I'm Pani Kawhia from Ngāti Porou. I would encourage you to vote no to dope.
The greatest risk to New Zealand is that this will in fact open Pandora's box. and that more cannabis will be produced and sold than ever before.
The government can't control pokie machines and liquor stores in our communities. How the hell are they going to control cannabis?
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko Jade Hohaia tōku ingoa. I'm saying nope to dope to protect our whakapapa. Our mokopuna, tamariki and rangatahi deserve better.
We're not talking about Woodstock weed or your parents' pot. Cannabis is now much more potent. It's a harder drug, it's a dab, it's an edible, it's a vape. Let's not go there.
Because we know that the cannabis industry is going to go after the most vulnerable communities. This is a real social justice issue, and we've got to do all we can to keep our children, young people and our families safe.
In my work as a counsellor, I see firsthand how cannabis addiction is destroying many lives, particularly among those who are in vulnerable communities.
I've seen the children of dope smokers grow up to smoke dope and worse.
This will destroy a lot of people, and especially the future generation of this beautiful nation.
I've seen young people have their motivation, energy, joy robbed from them by dope.
It is a recreational escape which produces diminished accuracy of observation, memory, reasoning and sound judgment.
I'm really concerned about the mental health issues we have in New Zealand.
I've seen many patients develop psychotic illness after smoking dope.
Legalising marijuana for recreational use will simply add to this problem.
It certainly has a killer punch.
As we're booting out big tobacco, let's not put out the welcome mat for big marijuana.
I want my family to grow up in a risk-free, safe environment from cannabis. That's why I'm challenging you, encouraging you to vote nope to dope.
Vote nope.
Vote nope.
Vote nope.
Vote nope.
For goodness sake, vote nope to dope.
Please vote nope to dope.
So at the next referendum, don't take the risk. Vote no.
Team, 2 quick points and then we'll get on to question and answers, all right? First point, I just want to address this whole issue that the police can control and can regulate for the government. I spent 25 years in the police here in New Zealand. 15 years I worked with the gangs. And so I need to explain to you that it is impossible to regulate and control, all right? Although it sounds beautiful, it just doesn't work. And let me explain to you why. So first of all, let's talk about the control and the regulation thing. I've got 3 beautiful daughters. It'll be like them coming home to see me and saying, Dad, we want to be prostitutes. It's legal and that's what we want to do, right? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do I do with this? And I got an idea. Let me see. Just to keep you safe, my dears, I will be your pimp and I will choose which men you sleep with to keep you safe. Now, what father in his right mind would do that, eh? Really? But see, this is exactly what the government is saying. The government's saying, well, we'll show you the shops to buy from. Isn't that stupid? Because it's still going to kill their brains and it's still going to kill them eventually. So I'm thinking, from a Pacific perspective, that is a stupid thing to say. But, we can say that because we hit it right between the eyes and really hard, right? Now, here's the second thing I want to talk to you about trying to play this game and beat the gangs in this drug war. So first of all, over this side is the drug war, and this is where the gangs are the All Blacks of the drug world. You need to understand that. They've been playing this game their way, their rules, and then all of a sudden, the government want to get involved in the game, but they're like a private school, first 15. All right? Well-funded, but the problem is that when they start trying to make the rules and say, okay, we're going to come and play, but there's no forward passes, all right? You can't kick on the first pass, and they start bringing all these rules, and the gangs are going, excuse me, hey, we're not in to play with your rules. We've been doing this for a long time, and whatever you come up with, we're not going to listen. And so this is where we come unstuck, because Pastor Robin decides that you guys aren't giving enough money in the collection, so she decides, you know what we're going to do? We're going to get into the cannabis trade. So we're now fundraising, right, doing the cannabis thing. And just imagine. So what happens is she needs to come up with some money to get her license. It might be about 100,000 threshold entry. And then she has to get a nice building like this, but it has to comply, right? So there's compliance involved. Then she has to come up with 200 products, and so she does. But here's the issue. Now you have to test those 200 products, right? And we know New Zealand doesn't have the capacity to test because we couldn't test the synthetic cannabis. Remember that? Everybody go, yes, yes, we're with you, Nick. Yeah, okay. So we then have to create some laboratories, 2, 3, 4 up and down the country, and then we have to bring some specialists in to run those laboratories to do the testing. Okay? So that's the first thing we have to do. Then what happens is Robin realizes that she's complying, okay? She's only getting 15% potency, and she's paying GST, and they're getting their tax money. But over here, the gangs are sort of saying, oh, Robin only does 15%. Right, we're doing a special next week on 30%. We're doubling the potency, and we're halving the price because we don't do tax, right? And what we'll do is we'll deliver by Uber. And so what's happening now is Robin's looking and going, how is it that they're still playing the game? They were meant to go away. And so then she demands enforcement, right? Because she's playing by the rules. So what does enforcement look like? Well, you've got to go over there and you've got to send some of those players off to the sin bin, don't you? You've got to take them off the field because if you just put an anklet on them and let them stay at home, they will still run their business and do it very well, right? So here's the problem. When you take them off the field, you've got to put them somewhere, right? Where's the sin bin? There are no prison beds for them, are there? So let me just check this out for a second. First of all, you've got to get a new police force because the police force that's going to do the enforcement are the same guys that can't come to your burglary, who can't come to your theft X car, who can't attend your motor accidents, right? Because they're busy. So now they're going to be doing the enforcement as well. And here's the thing. Once they lock them up, they've got to go put them in a prison that we don't have. So we're going to build some prisons. And we're going to have to bring some wardens. Haven't even touched on the hospitals, haven't even talked about mental health. But here's the problem. There's a small group of people, and we saw it, 8.5, that want to get stoned and forget reality because they've got issues. And there's a smaller group of fat cats up this end, right? Robin and her friends that want to get rich, right? Yes, that's how it is. Small group want to get stoned, smaller group of fat cats want to get rich, and all of us in the middle are going to be funding this. We're going to be funding this through our taxes in the building of these buildings and prisons and everything else. And like I said, we haven't even got onto the health and the mental health stuff. So this is what really annoys me. I spent 25 years of my life keeping you safe. And then I turn my back and this happens. And I'm thinking, no, not on my watch. And that's why I'm down here today, to explain to you, it doesn't work what the government's trying to tell you. It sounds great, but it does not work. It's never worked anywhere else in the world. But what is the New Zealand trying to say? Oh, we're going to do it our way. As if our way is any better than anywhere else in the world. It ain't. And so we need to wake up to the fact that if we open this door and everything starts to cut loose and it turns to custard, it'll be because we voted the wrong way. The answers to the problem of society are not in Wellington. I know that from personal experience. They're sitting in this room here and now. And let me explain to you how I know. When I was in the police, you're not allowed to say anything negative about the government because they pay our salaries, right? And even right now, if you go to ask a police officer for his personal opinion, he won't give it to you. He might quietly whisper it to you, but you're not allowed to talk about the ruling government at the time. But here was a problem that we had 1999, 2000. While I was on the riot squad back in Auckland, we had massive problems with alcohol and the problems that it was causing to our young people, road carnage, domestic violence, all the battered husbands, all of that stuff that was going wrong at the time, right? So what we did was we told the government, could you fix this? So they said, leave it to us. They got a little select committee together, they went into the room, they started talking, and they came out and they said, we've got it, we're fixing it. We've got 3 solutions. First solution, we're going to extend the drinking hours. Second solution, we're going to increase the liquor outlets. That's how supermarkets got involved. Third solution, we're going to lower the drinking age. That's their solution. And you've got to ask yourself this question. When they start making laws like that, who's paying them? Hey? Who's paying them? If we open this door to the cannabis thing, and it all really does start to hit the fan, we're going to be asking them, could you fix it? The same people that created that law, can you fix it? What they come up with, who knows? Because at the end of the day, I believe the reason why government's pushing this so hard is because somebody is paying them. There's got to be some spin-offs for them further down the track. And so we need to sort of say, you know what? This is not what we want in Kiwi land. And so I suggest that when it comes time for us to vote on the 17th of October, that when you get to the referendums, let's just say, let's adopt the Pacific view, and let's not kill our old people. Let's not kill our sick people. And when it comes time for the cannabis thing, let's not kill our young people's minds with this stupid stuff so that a small group can enjoy it, a smaller group can get rich, and all of us taxpayers are going to fund it. Team, that's where we're going to leave this. I'm going to get Bob to come forward and answer some questions now, but just a reminder, you're not the third speaker. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I will point you out, and I'll give you the order, and Bob will do his best to answer your questions, okay? Awesome, team, you're doing really well. It'll only be a few more minutes now.
Okay, so very good question. Euthanasia, binding, if it's a yes vote, will be law by lunchtime. Well, it immediately becomes law. If it's a no vote, they keep pushing. They'll just keep pushing to try and wedge the door open. That's the way they operate. So expect another bill to come before Parliament, maybe in 4 or 5 years. Cannabis, not binding. Okay. So there is a proposed law, but that'll get changed. Bits will be changed. Labor and the Greens have said that, well, let me give you the scenario. If it's a yes vote on cannabis and Labor and Greens form the next government, it'll be law within a month, probably. They'll go through the select committee process, but it'll be law within a month. If National form the next government, they have said that they will put it to select committee, but they don't promise support past that. And here's an interesting scenario. If we win the no vote on cannabis, but Labor and the Greens form the next government, I'll leave that to your imagination. Yeah, well, related to the tax issue, I think that whenever you think we should change a law just so we can make more tax, which is one of the arguments, think of the $1 billion that we can earn from legalising cannabis, that's really dumb justification for a law. That means they're getting pretty desperate. Why are they introducing this law? It's because there's an ideology of human rights, and that is that no longer are we, it's a misunderstanding of who we are as humans and what it means to interact as a society, and it comes down to you have the right to do what you want to do. If you want to abort your unborn child, you have that right. If you want to kill yourself, you have that right. That's euthanasia. If you want to get stoned, if you want to get onto drugs, you have that right. We shouldn't stigmatise and marginalise those people. That's what Helen Clark and the Drug Foundation, they don't want to just legalise cannabis, by the way. Make sure you understand that. If the yes vote wins the cannabis, that's the start of the debate, because they will then move on to all other drugs. The policy of people like Helen Clark and the Drug Foundation is to remove criminalisation of all drugs, because it leads to they call it the stigmatisation and marginalisation of drug users. That's a Ponzi term. Basically, the reason we oppose it is because we support what's best for people. It's not about marginalising or stigmatising drug use. It's actually drug use harms people. But you see, it's just human rights, and so everything's a human right. And so 16-year-olds are in court saying we have a human right to vote. And you have people who are born biologically female who say I have a human right to identify as a dude and change my name. In fact, I got contacted by a teacher today in a secondary school. I won't name the secondary school, but there's a teacher there who she no longer wants to be referred to as she. The kids have to refer to her as they. You know, so they're fooling around in the class. Here they come. Yeah. Or let's just wait for a they. I mean, it's just, but this is a human right. So sorry, just a quick answer to your question. It's based on human rights. Well, hopefully I've answered it already. Go back to your daughter and say, you want medicinal cannabis? Great. As soon as this referendum's over, we're going to go and lobby Parliament and get them to fix the medicinal regime. Okay? But tell her that the referendum has got nothing to do with that. It's about kids blowing their brains out and getting stoned, and about having drug drivers on the road and having people stoned at work. Okay? Hopefully that's a really key point to push back, because your daughter's justification in her mind is probably about 30% of the vote, and if we all do our work, the cannabis no vote will just go through the roof. Yeah, basically there's no parental notification. Once you qualify at 18 or 19 or above, so there's no parental notification. Family don't have to be told if the patient doesn't want it. They'll still have to persuade the two doctors that, you know, they qualify for it, that they have a terminal illness, you know, so they still have to meet a criteria. But you're right, family can be excluded from that whole process, which is pretty scary. And as you know, you imagine a young person, 18, 19, 21, 23, that has just been told that they have a terminal disease. And they've still got to go, they've still got to process it, they've got to go through the grieving, they've then got to look at what their options are and possible treatment. What are they thinking? They're just thinking, I just want to end it all. And we're actually, as a state, making that possible and actually suggesting that actually that might be a good option. That's a terrible message to be sending. And that's the same to anybody. I mean, even elderly people, they get a sickness, they know that they're going to be dependent on family, and they're saying to themselves, look, I'll just save everybody the trouble. Let's get it over with now. That's a terrible way to approach death, which I know for many of us have seen loved ones die. Sometimes those final days are actually, they can be very special. Sure, sometimes it can be difficult. But often it's not the dying person who's finding it difficult, it's us watching it. And so, we just can't go there. Well, they're not. That's a complete, utter myth. People are not in prison for cannabis. People may be in prison because of the involvement in cannabis in their crime. So generally, what the police say is that they only go after cannabis-related crimes when people are committing other crimes, either getting the drug or while on the drug. And even then, if there's a level of addiction, they will always take a health approach. They will not lock up people for cannabis-only related crimes. So that's a myth that they're pushing, that we're locking up people and that we're throwing away the key. It is simply not happening. If you do you get our newsletter? Okay, tonight, just while you were coming here, we just sent out a newsletter, and there's a link to the debate last night on News Talk ZB, and the Police Association was on it, and he rubbished the Drug Foundation for suggesting that exact point, that we were locking up people. He said it's not happening. So have a listen to that audio. It's quite interesting. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's already happening. I mean, we're seeing a level of socialism never seen before, to the point where it's no longer the family that takes responsibility. The state will feed your kids in the morning. The state will give your child contraception. The state will sneak your child off for an abortion. You will be told how to raise your kids, even if you're not abusing them. And yeah, it's just more continuation it's more state. I mean, that's probably wider than these two issues, but it's removing that moral ground. The interesting thing about the human rights point, though, is that there is always a clash of human rights. So the human rights for a woman to have an abortion steps on the rights of the unborn child to be born. And the right of someone to have euthanasia steps on the right of people to actually get euthanasia and the palliative care that they deserve. And then that's what campaigners, doctors are saying, is that you and I can probably access good palliative care where we are, but you think of rural areas around the country where just getting a doctor's appointment involves a long drive and a waiting list of a couple of weeks. They just think, what's the point? What's the point? Let's just end it now. So vulnerable people's rights are going to be trampled on because somebody wants the right to be able to end it quicker rather than just going through that palliative care. So there's always a clash of human rights. And I would say, this is what Nick's getting at, the human right of a small group of people to get stoned and the human right of a few people like these two here to get rich. And as a result, all our human rights are being trampled on because we've got to clean up the mess. You see the clash of human rights? Yeah, they can still have an impairment simply because they're not safe to do the job. But it is a nightmare for employers because they're saying under OSH, if there's an accident, the employer is liable for the accident. And so they're going to have to make sure they know whether people are wasted or not. And the interesting thing about cannabis is it can stay in, if you're a regular user and you stop, it can still impair you for up to a month afterwards. The drug foundations say that employers should not be drug testing at work because it ruins the trust relationship between the employer and the employee. But, you know, it is, employers are really concerned. And, you know, people involved in forestry, in construction industry, transportation, they are majorly concerned by this. And for example, in Colorado, when I was there, there was a major shortage of being able to find truck drivers who weren't stoned to do cartage around the state. So, yeah. Well, we're changing the law, so they're saying say you're a doctor, you will still have the conscientious objection to not be involved in the process, but you're still going to have to refer me to the pro-euthanasia doctor against your conscience rights. Well, you break the law. Yeah, you break the law. So, you know, that is a concern about the conscientious objection. The real concern is, which we're starting to hear about and we're just monitoring, is that when people are applying for medical school, they're being asked what their views are on abortion and euthanasia. And the concern is that that will start to determine whether you're employed or whether you're trained and you get accepted into medical school. We've already seen that happen with marriage celebrants, haven't we? We were told we'd have conscientious objection on same-sex marriage, but of course, if you want to be a celebrant, it's one of the questions you're asked. Will you marry a same-sex couple? It's why I resigned.
Some of the supposed safeguards in relation to imposed duties or restrictions on doctors, do you consider that those safeguards will be legally enforceable in the event of breach?
Well, the problem with it is, I mean, I would say they have worked hard to put in safeguards to doctors. They've tried to, I mean, there are some safeguards, but this is the problem. They say that a doctor has to just do his best. It's a little bit like the safeguards around abortion as well. For late-term abortion, the safeguard for doctors is very vague and very generalised. It's not specific. So for euthanasia, you're telling a doctor to do their best, likely to end in 6 months. They're supposed to try and assess whether there's coercion. I don't know about you, but it's pretty easy hiding coercion, isn't it? I mean, you know, anyway, those of us who have raised kids, we know how easy it is to hide the truth, isn't it? I'm talking about the kids, not us. So, you know, so that's just it. How do you assess that in a patient and actually understand what is driving their request? Deep down, they're saying, oh no, I'm fine, I want this, but deep down they know they just don't want to be a burden. Their kids are pressuring them and telling them, we don't want to look after you. I had a terminal patient who came to my meeting in Christchurch, and she said to me that the medical professional sat on the end of her bed and actually said, do you know you're costing us $1,000 a day? Yeah, this was in, I won't tell you which hospital. Shocking.
Oh, we got some more questions? That's why I put my hand up. You meant to put it up then before Bob sits down. Last 3 questions. You, and then.
Yep. They're supposed to have labelling on the packet. That's one thing in Colorado that a family group actually, once the door was opened, they tried to capture some ground back and said that they had to have warning signs on the packet, a little bit like on smoking packets. You know how they suddenly started putting horrific pictures on smoking packets because they realised the gate had been opened too wide. So there will be restrictions on labelling. So they say they're trying to control it, okay? To their credit, they're trying to control it. They're trying to keep the THC down. They're trying to limit the products. But the problem is that as soon as you put controls on the legal people, the first 15, the All Blacks of the drug trade, are just going to adjust their product. You see, what they're trying to persuade you is that if we legalise cannabis, the gangs are going to say, we've lost this one. Pack it up, boys. We're out of here. We're not doing drugs anymore. Okay? And if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you.
One more in the centre, then
No, it's R20. If it's what, sorry? No, they can't, no. But they will, what we're doing is we're going to say, actually it's a very good point though. If let's take an 18-year-old. At the moment, if an 18-year-old smokes a joint, purchases or passes a joint around, it's illegal, right? Currently? Okay? If we legalise cannabis and the 18-year-old smokes a joint, passes it around, or, deals it, it's still illegal. It doesn't actually change. All that's happening is that the whole of society and the older people are doing it, growing it in their backyard, and guess what the gangs are going to do? Who's their new target market? It's the under-20s. Because their older market are supposed to be going off to the government stores. Oh, I can't answer that question. I'll get in trouble. No. Christians have been asleep at the wheel for too long. And thank you for being here, because it suggests that you actually are concerned about this. And so what we're trying to do is give you the resources. And look, this pamphlet here, you won't find any Bible verses in it. Our approach has always been that your argument has to reach the marketplace. And if you have to use biblical justification for your stand, go back and think about it again. Think about science. I know it drives what we think, and it underpins our DNA, but if we are going to win the public debate, you've got to argue at their level. And as soon as you bring in a Bible verse, they just switch off and they'll just mock. So these pamphlets are designed for coffee tables, cafes, letterboxes. Good. Thank you. We've printed 350,000. I've just ordered another 50,000. It's been an incredible how far it's gone. And people have come to our meetings saying I was going to vote yes, and I'm now voting no. So people do change when they hear the facts. So the other side is worried.
One more question on this side. Last question.
Yeah, there is. The answer is a yes, but people who want to liberalise in that respect and turn away from Judeo-Christian values, they've figured out that the way to do that is to infiltrate themselves into key positions, governmental positions, media positions, and they've done that very effectively to the point where now, unfortunately, our media is saturated with that viewpoint. So it's very frustrating, yeah, and that's why a lot of people have turned to social media, because of course now the social media are starting to shut down some of that as well. So yeah, it's an uphill battle because we're going against the flow of culture. But I tell you what, we may not win every battle, but we'll lose every battle that we don't even show up to. And every debate that we've been involved in, even when I've known that our back's against the wall and we're going to lose it, we've still got to show up, because in those debates you've got to speak truth. So like with the same-sex marriage debate, I knew we were going to lose that because I knew the makeup of Parliament. But I tell you what, everybody wanted to talk about marriage for about 6 months. It was awesome, even the politicians. So we showed up and talked about marriage. Still lost the definition aspect of it, but we still got to talk about it. So we've got to show up. Yeah.
Thank you, team. It's been fantastic being here tonight. I just want to share just a couple of quick points that I think are really important. I remember watching a guy doing a presentation to a select committee on the abortion thing, and this was a Tongan accountant at Wellington Hospital. And one of the things he explained to the select committee was the fact that the people that run Wellington Hospital, they're not doctors, they're business people that sit on that committee. So what happens is, and this is an answer to one of the questions about what happens if doctors don't toe the party line, right? So what'll happen is, it comes to appraisal time, and I'll say, hey, Bob, you're a fantastic doctor, but we realise that you're still doing what you're not meant to be doing. You're still giving medication to people that we said are on the dying list, right? And Bob says, no, that's because I swore allegiance that I would save lives. And then, of course, Dr. Robin comes in, and you're our best doctor. You had 200 people commit suicide. Fantastic. Do you see how the KPIs works? So even though doctors have their own free will, come appraisal time, that's when it starts to show, because it's all about money. That's what it's about. So in finishing, two things. One, people sort of say, well, alcohol's legal. You know, why can't we have another stupid thing?